So welcome everybody. My name is Tejendra Veer Singh, or call me TV. I work at Office of Advanced Research Computing. And today's exciting presentation is by Dr. Victoria Rolandi. The topic of the presentation is Stability and Resolvent Analysis of Fluid Flows, Methods and Challenges. So we are recording this session. It will be available after the talk is over. Another thing is, if you are not talking, maybe mute yourself. That will be less disturbance during the presentation. Let me introduce Dr. Rolandi. She obtained a BSc in Mathematical Engineering from Politecnico di Torino, and MSc in Computational Science and Engineering from Politecnico di Milano. I hope I'm pronouncing this correct. She later completed a PhD in Fluid Dynamics at ISAE Supero before joining the Mechanical and Aerospace Department at UCLA as a postdoctoral researcher at Professor Thaira's lab. Her research at UCLA focuses on developing and implementing algorithms helpful in characterizing, modeling, and controlling turbulent flows. So without much ado, let's welcome Dr. Rolandi, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much, TV, for the introduction. Let me share the screen. Okay. Can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. And thank you for coming to this seminar. Today I will talk about stability and the resolvent analysis of fluid flows, methods and challenges. For this presentation, I will first introduce some concepts of the instabilities, and before moving to the linear stability, the classical linear stability and the eigenvalue problem that comes from this theory, and some methods for solving the eigenvalue problems. Then we will see some limits of this approach and the need of another type of analysis called the resolvent analysis, together with some limitations on the application that we would like to treat, but also some propositions to overcome these limitations. So let me start this talk with an experiment conducted by Reynolds in 1883, where an ink was inserted in a water flow to see the evolution of the water flow. And we can see that when the velocity is low, we can see that the flow flows with a straight line, while when we increase the velocity, so we increase the Reynolds number, which indicates the ratio between the forces, the inertial forces and the viscous forces, we see a different topology of the flow. So we say that the flow has become unstable, and then we have a transition. So why studying instabilities is so important? Because instabilities are everywhere around us. Here I report some examples. We can see here the Kelvin-Helmholtz clouds that develops when two layers of different densities have different velocity and flow one above the other. Or we can see here the cloud layer in the atmosphere that hits the mountains of a certain island and of Madeira Island, and creates this pattern called the von Karman instability, which is the same that most of bluff body experience. And here we also see, for the example of the flow around a circular cylinder, the destabilization of these von Karman vortices that becomes three-dimensional. And also it's very important to study instability because, especially for applications, we sometimes want to shut down the instability. So we need to study them in order to analyze where they come from, and so how can we attenuate these instabilities. There are different methods for analyzing instability. There are mainly, I have divided them into groups now. The data-driven ones that computes the stability, investigate the stability starting from snapshots of the flow fields, like the proper orthogonal decomposition or the dynamic mode decompositions, or operator-based approaches, like the global stability analysis and the resolvent analysis, which are based on the discrete operator calculated with respect to a fixed point. Here reported the mean, for example. And in this talk, we will concentrate on this type of approaches. Let me also introduce some concepts that are general for some concept of stability that are general for any dynamical system. So we have here a dynamical system. We can find the equilibrium point of the dynamical system, and we can encounter three possible scenarios. Either the system is stable, so if we perturb, if we move this little ball, it will goes back to the equilibrium state, or marginally stable if, let's say, nothing happens, or unstable if we perturb this system, and now this little ball goes far from the equilibrium state. And Lyapunov was the first one to mathematically express the first concept of stability, in particular an asymptotical concept. So a dynamical system is asymptotical stable if, as time goes to infinity, the state will go back to the equilibrium state. So how this is seen in the fluid dynamic context. So here in the fluid dynamics, we have the Navier-Stokes system that describes the fluid motion. So this is our dynamical system. We can create the equilibrium state, which we call with the base flow. It could be, which can be a mean flow or a steady state. Then we perturb this system, and through a Taylor expansion, we are neglecting the higher order terms. We are able to derive this dynamic of the perturbation. So we have that in a small neighborhood of a state, the dynamic of the full system is characterized by the dynamic of the linearized system. So now that we have derived the linear dynamic of the perturbation, we need to find a way to model this perturbation, this Q prime. And actually this depends on the problem that we are investigating. For example, if it's 1D, one dimension, like the channel flow, or 2-dimensional, like the flow around a circular cylinder, or 3-dimensional, for example, the flow around a sphere. And let's take the more general case. So here the perturbation is has this form. So the spatial evolution depends on the three directions, and this perturbation grows or decays in time with respect to omega. Inserting this form of the perturbation into the dynamical system, we end up to this eigenvalue problem, where omega is a complex number whose real part indicates the growth rate, while its imaginary part indicates the frequency of the perturbation. So we have that the flow with respect to omega r, we have that the flow is stable if the growth rate is negative, or it's unstable if the growth rate is greater than 0. But let's see how the linear operator is formed. What is actually the linear operator, and what's especially the dimension of the linear operator that we want to calculate the eigenvalues and the eigenvectors. So the Navier-Stokes system is composed by 5 equations, and the state vector is composed with a vector of 5 terms. And so the linear operator comes to be a matrix which is 5n per 5n, which has 5n per 5n dimension, where n is the number of cells that I need to discretize my problem. So it's we have that this number, this dimension can be extremely large for certain cases. And so it can be very hard to calculate all the eigenvalues and the eigenvectors associated to this matrix. But actually, we are not interested to all the entire to all the eigenvalues and the eigenvectors, but actually we are interested only on those related to the highest growth rate, so those that brings the instability. Let's see how some methods to compute these few eigenvalues and eigenvector associated to the highest growth rate. Let me start with the power iteration, which comes from, we can also define the Krylov sequence, which are the power iteration, the iterative multiplication of a certain operator into an initial guess Q0. And here I reported a very simple example, a 2x2 matrix, and we can calculate its eigenvalues and eigenvector. And here we can see what represents the power iterating this operator. So we start from an initial guess, and we can see that as we power iterate, all the vectors alienate with the eigenvector associated to the highest eigenvalue. So this can be a way to approximate the highest eigenvalue and the highest the eigenvector associated to this highest eigenvalue. However, this computes only one, but and especially when we calculate the power iteration, if we only consider the last one, there is a very huge waste of useful information. So we can actually decide to construct this subspace composed by the sequenced power iteration. And Arnoldi ended up to this equation where actually H represents the projection of the original matrix into this subspace. So H is an approximation of my original operator. So I can calculate the eigenvalues and the eigenvector of this projection matrix, which has a dimension much smaller than compared to the original problem. So I can calculate the eigenvalues and the eigenvector associated to this matrix, and these approximate those of my original matrix. However, with this approach, if we want, let's say, a certain number of eigenvalues and eigenvector, the dimension of the Krylov subspace needed for the convergence of this desired number of eigenvalues and eigenvector may be very high. So there is actually an evolution of this method, which is called the Krylov-Shor method, in which after having computed this factorization, and if I don't have reached the convergence of the desired number of eigenpairs, I can perform a short decomposition of this matrix, which allows me to literally detect the eigenvalues and the eigenvector associated to lowest convergence of or a very low growth rate. And so we can remove this part and restart again the factorization until I have the desired number converged. Let's see now an example. We can treat now the first transition of the flow around bluff bodies. This was a specific topic of my PhD. Here I show, for example, the primary instability of most flows around bluff bodies experience. This primary instability, which is a Hopf bifurcation, transforms the stationary state to a true periodic state. Here we can see that this stationary state can be represented by a fixed point in my phase space, and we actually want to see if we perturb this state, whether if this state goes back to the stationary solution, or if eventually it's unstable and results in this periodic limit cycle, which represents this periodic solution. So let's see what we do in practice. So an example. For this case, so we have for different Reynolds number, we can compute the eigenvalues and the eigenvector of the linear operator. And we want to see when the growth rate becomes greater than 0. So here we have our transition. And in particular, with respect to the method that I use for computing this eigenvalue problem, for the number of cells for discretizing this problem, I used an order of 10 to the power fourth number of cells, which results in a linear operator of more than 10 to the power 8 dimension. And I could use a Krylov subspace of only dimension of the order of 10, which decreased substantially the computational cost of these computations. So now that I found this threshold, we can actually also we can derive this bifurcation graph, and we can see that here, in correspondence to the critical Reynolds number, we have this fixed point that has become unstable and results in this limit cycle. We can also see that the amplitude of this limit cycle increases. And actually, there is another transition, which is called the secondary instability. It corresponds to when this periodic state becomes three-dimensional and can be represented in this bifurcation diagram by a torus. Let me spend just a few words on how do we analyze the stability of a limit cycle, because before I said, okay, we have a base flow, which is a fixed point, while here we have a limit cycle. So actually we can use Floquet theory, which tells us that the stability of the limit cycle can be computed by tracking at each period t the perturbation. So we have, due to the periodicity of the base flow, we have that at each cycle, the linear operator is constant. So we can actually, we are actually transforming the stability of the limit cycle again in a stability of a fixed point. So, but how do we track this instability? So we have to go back 1 second to the dynamic of the perturbation and actually derive the evolution in time of this perturbation. And we see that the evolution of the perturbation is governed by the exponent of the linear operator by a certain time t. If we want to track it at each period t, we only have to substitute the time by the time of the oscillation period. This problem ends up in an eigenvalue problem, which is slightly different from the one that we have seen before, where we have to compute the eigenvalues and the eigenvector with respect to M, which is the propagator matrix, which is instead, in fact, the exponent of the linear operator multiplied the period t. Okay. So far we have seen this, let's say, binary concept, either the flow is stable or unstable. But actually this analysis does not allow us to answer some questions which are instead relevant, like where the instability comes from. And is the instability associated to the highest eigenvalue actually the most energetic one, so the one which is the most likely to appear? And we do want to reply to this question, because actually what happens in reality is that the instability does not originate, usually does not find its origin where we see its effect. And actually answering this question opened the door to flow control and to many applications, because, for example, we know that they're part of, for example, of fuel consumption that comes from instability developing on the wing of the airplane. So if we are able to answer where this instability comes from, we are able to find ways to shut down the instability before it can grow. So we can actually reduce the fuel consumption, which brings to a lower evolution of CO2 and to reduce also the costs. So first of all, we have to revisit the way we have derived the dynamic of the perturbation. And how do we do so? We actually, before we have neglected this term, but now this term, we consider this term, which are inserted in the linear dynamic like a forcing term, which will allows us to understand also where this instability comes from. And from this, modeling the response and the forcing term with this harmonic form, we are able to derive our new operator, which is called the Resolvent operator. And so we have this transfer function. Also, we have to answer the question, is the eigenvector associated to the highest eigenvalue also the most energetic one? Here, I report another example, actually is only slightly different from the one that I showed before. Before here, we had a 0, and now we inserted a non-zero element, which affects the eigenvector because now they are no more orthogonal. And since they are no more orthogonal, they can interact with each other. And actually, if we see the application, starting from an initial condition, we want to see the application of this operator, we see that all the vectors now do not align perfectly with the highest eigenvector, but actually in another direction. What's this direction? Actually, this direction is can be found with a singular value decomposition, which helps us to understand where are the vectors which will be more which will suffer much more energetic expansion, and where we will find them. So U is where we will find them, the response, and V is where they comes from. So this is the Resolvent analysis is based on this singular value decomposition. So with the Resolvent analysis, we want to find we want to solve the singular value decomposition of the Resolvent operator, which gives us the responsive modes and the forcing modes, and they are linked through this matrix, which is a diagonal matrix, and indicates the energy associated to these response forcing pairs. So what do you see actually with a Resolvent analysis? Here I report an example from my colleague Jean, and I report here a case of an ACA-12 overflow around an ACA-12 airfoil at Reynolds 23,000 and an angle of attack of 9 degrees. And we have to remember that the Resolvent operator is actually a function of omega that I select. So we can find the evolution of these gains, of this energy with respect to omega, and we can find those associated, the frequency associated to highest energy. So the one that are related to the instability that actually we want to attenuate or suppress definitively. And what we can see also is that, for example, here I report the response and the forcing mode related to the really highest gain, and we can see the response of this mode, so where we see the effects of the instability here in the shear layer, and from the forcing, we can see where this instability comes from. And this in particular tells us where we have to act in order to suppress or mitigate at least this instability. So, however, in applications like the one cited before, like the airplanes for flight intents, we have that the Reynolds number associated with this flow are very high. And actually, this means that there are very small structures that develop in the flow, and in order to capture to capture all the evolution of this flow, we need a very refined mesh, so a very refined spatial discretization, which ends up, for example, for turbulent case, to have a number of degrees of freedom, so a resolution of my spatial discretization, which is of the order 10 to the power, say, 8 or 10 to the power 9, which results to a linear operator, and so to a resolvent operator, which are matrices, which are extremely large matrices. Also, we have to understand that we never compute explicitly the resolvent, because we only have access to the linear operator, but we never compute the inverse of this matrix. So we can, since the singular value decomposition relates to these eigenvalue problems, we can either reformulate these problems in terms of the matrix that we know, so this matrix, but in this case, the largest gain that are for the resolvent matrix, in this case corresponds to the lowest gain obtained in this eigenvalue problem, which are harder to find rather compared to the largest one. And also we have to see that if we want to apply methods such as the power iteration or the Krylov subspace method that I showed you before, and so we have to compute the products between the resolvent and some initial guess, actually this translates into solving this linear system in terms of the matrix that we actually have. So we see that related to the application that we would like on which we would like to apply this analysis, we have a huge computational cost and memory allocation. So that's why the applications of the resolvent analysis have been restricted to laminar flows, or at the most at flows at moderate Reynolds numbers. However, there are some ways that we are investigating to try to overcome this limitation and to go beyond and to go to a higher Reynolds number. First of all, I would like to cite the amazing work of my colleague Jean, who performed through randomized linear algebra. He performed the singular value decomposition of a low rank approximation of the resolvent operator. Or there are methods such as the hierarchical semi-separable methods, where the matrix could be separated in different blocks, and then we could perform a singular value decomposition on each block. And especially when we change the frequency, when we change omega, we only have to modify the blocks related to the diagonal. Then there are also other methods that exploit the sparsity of the linear operator and compress the matrix into a much memory demanding matrix. And also there are other methods such as the time step in matrix free, which actually never compute explicitly these operators, but actually just integrating time either the linearized and the adjoint, both the linearized and adjoint equations. At the moment, I'm concentrating especially in these two parts. In particular, what I'm doing now is trying to extend the randomized resolvent also to the other method that I also showed you before, the Krylov subspaces method, the power iteration, the Arnoldi algorithm, and the Krylov-Schur method. So let me conclude this talk. Today we have seen the classical linear stability and the derived eigenvalue problem. We have seen methods for solving the large eigenvalue problems, such as the power iteration, the Arnoldi methods, and the Krylov-Schur methods. We have seen that there is a limit concerning this approach because we cannot answer questions like where the instability comes from, which are relevant for flow control applications. And so we have to move to this, to the resolvent analysis to answer this question. However, we are limited so far in terms of Reynolds numbers, but there are some ways that we are investigating to try to overcome these limitations. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any question.
Thank you, Victoria. So please raise your hand if you have any question or feedback. Anyone? Looks like you all understood everything. Yeah,
I have a question.
Yes.
A great talk, Victoria. But I have one naive question. I probably missed the part where you explain why singular value decomposition, the direction in those axes are the true axes of energy, with the most energy and the expansion instead of the eigen vectors. Okay, I probably missed that part a little. Yeah, could you
because I mean, there are two examples here. The first example that I showed, which is let me find again. Okay, here in this case, the matrix, the eigenvector were orthogonal. So the evolution of one, with respect to one eigendirection does not affect the evolution of the other. While in this case, the eigenvectors are not orthogonal, so they are not linear independent. That's why there are other regions of more energetic, and they can be found with the singular pair decomposition. So in fact, here we see that the energy with respect to this direction is associated to a factor 2.3, while the eigendirection of the largest eigenvector is associated to a factor 2.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else? If not, let me ask a naive question. If when we use these numerical methods with Taylor expansion, there is a stability within the numerical method, like how much should be the ratio between delta t versus delta x, kind of.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Sorry.
So when we use this Taylor series expansion for solving the differential equation, there is a stability.
Are you talking about this Taylor expansion?
Yes, there is a stability of the numerical scheme itself, which depends on.
Yes, this is for mainly for constructing also the base flow at which we calculate with respect to which we calculate the linear operator. This relates the CFL.
Yes.
The CFL constant. Yeah.
So in the whole analysis, this has been assumed that that condition was already
achieved. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? If not, let's thank you. Thanks, Dr. Rolandi. It's for the wonderful talk. And I see many people who are from the field who joined today. And I hope you will collaborate or at least learn from each other. So thank you very much. And we'll see you in the next presentation on ECR next month. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.